confession to make. I thought that to be a better software engineer, it just took studying more textbook knowledge in the library. I thought that software engineering initially was like a game, and that if you just grind more leak code problems, that you just eventually end up a principal engineer. Yet in my time working as an engineering lead at Netflix and earlier in my career up in Seattle at Amazon, I noticed that the best engineers that I worked with didn't necessarily know more textbook theory than I did. But it was just their approach to engineering that set them apart. I noticed that the best engineers that I worked with all had a different kind of mindset to engineering that I call the investor mindset. And this allowed them to ask better questions, prioritize better, and set themselves apart. Some of the kind of questions that they would ask, for example, some of the things they would consider. They wouldn't just delve straight into the work, but would consider what exactly would my work finally pay off. They knew the value of their time, and they were able to trade money for time efficiently. They also understood that, as many engineers have, they have many options of many tasks to work on. But they understood opportunity cost and knew how to choose which tasks would generate the most impact for their team. In today's talk, I'm going to delve into the investor mindset in engineering. I'll go over 3 common problems that probably every single person here has gone through in their career at some point, and show how thinking like an investor will help you make better technical decisions and save time. So my first point is about the time value of work. In investing, there's this concept called the time value of money, which is that money now is worth more than money later, right? I'd rather have an investment pay off 1 year from now than 5 years from now. Engineering work actually has a time value as well. Engineering work that can pay off 1 year from now is worth more than engineering work that pays off 5 years from now. And we actually saw this recently with the performance of Meta stock. As many of us probably know, Meta hasn't done too well in the last year. It's down over 50% since its all-time highs last year. And part of the reason for this actually has to do with some of their rebranding towards their focus on the metaverse. If we see from an interview with their VP of their metaverse initiative from last year, Facebook's metaverse investment might not fully pay off for 15 years from a company executive. 15 years, they're completely focused on the metaverse, and they're telling us that there won't be any payoff until as long as 15 years into the future. And to add, in addition to this is after they said Facebook is also spending, last year, they spent at least $10 million this year on its metaverse division, and it expects to spend even more for the next several years. We saw how skittish investors were about this, and we can clearly see that investors weren't too happy about the long payoff periods. They weren't too happy about the increased spending in this project, and the stock price shows the result. So just as how investors were not, investors didn't want to, were skittish about projects that paid off too long, I think that in engineering in general, we have to also emphasize the time value of our work and bias more towards work that can pay off sooner than later, because there's significant risk that we take on when we wait for work that pays off too far into the future. And this particularly happens, I've seen in my career, with engineering migrations. I think that for migration, so I know that as engineers, we tend to focus on the technical aspects of migrations and just how to execute on it. But I invite all of us to think about migrations from a different standpoint, but from an investment standpoint instead. What a migration really is a guaranteed upfront cost with rewards that pay off far into the future. And these rewards can pay off, well further into the future than we can expect. So to give you a sample. So let's say we had this is a timeline of a 2-year migration. So the first 2 years that we execute on this migration, it's basically a sunk cost, the guaranteed cost in the first 2 years that we have to pay. And then afterwards, we finally have some reward when we start to reap the benefits of this in years 3 and 4. And so some people might say that, okay, we spent 2 years at the beginning, and then finally we reap the rewards in years 3 and 4, so then at year 4 is a break-even point for when we can say this migration has paid off. But year 4 is actually not the break-even point. First of all, with the time value of work, years 1 and 2, because it's closer to the present, is worth more than years 3 and 4. So the 2 years that we spend are actually more valuable than the 2 years after. So the rewards, so year 4 can't be the break-even point. It has to at least be sometime after that. In addition to this, any engineering work that we do has to have some sort of reward, right? So like it has to pay off much more than the cost it took to undergo that migration. It doesn't make sense to spend 2 years migrating and just to save 2 years. Because if you spend 2 years and then save 2 years, then you might as well just not do the migration at all. I almost compare this to almost like leasing an apartment. Like if I have a 1-year lease for an apartment and I spend 11 months decorating it, and then only get to enjoy it for 1 month before I have to move out, then I have to wonder, why did I even spend all that effort decorating it at all? So I have this rule in engineering because of this because of the reward that we have to try to get from it, that I call it the 2x rule, which is that I want to get 2x the rewards of whatever cost it took to undertake that engineering initiative. So if I spend 1 month migrating, I gotta save myself 2 months. If I spend 10K like purchasing a library, like purchasing some tools, then it has to save us 20K in engineering costs. So with that rule, then I want to project if we project 10 years into the future for a 2-year migration. So we start the migration in year 1. The first 2 years is guaranteed cost. We finish the migration, and then because of the 2x rule, we have to actually enjoy the benefits of this migration for at least 2 times the cost, so 4 years. So that we reap the rewards for years 3 through 6, and then finally we reach a break-even point, and then we can say that anything after that we could almost consider like a profit off of this migration. So, the payoff period, the year 6 payoff period, it's actually kind of surprising sometimes. It's actually a lot further into the future than we expect for a 2-year migration. Like, it could take a while to pay off. And along with this is, migrations actually can come with a lot of risk. So just to go over that timeline again. So we have the break-even point at year 6, for example. And there are a lot of things that can actually happen before we even reach the break-even point. So, for example, business priorities change all the time. The macroeconomic landscape changes, the business is moving in a different direction. And so, if the business moves in a different direction, and they have to deprecate a service, then that means that we never actually even reach the break-even point when we actually really start to profit off of this migration, had that happened in year 4. Another risk to this is, exit risks. As we know, like startups get acquired all the time, and generally when a startup is acquired, it's valued as a multiple of the revenue. So unless the migration can increase the revenue, then it doesn't really show up in the acquisition value of that startup. And lastly, execution risks. We sometimes kind of assume that migrations just happen perfectly all the time, but that's generally a very dangerous assumption to make. Mistakes all happen all the time, and a single execution mistake between years 1 and 2 could outweigh any potential reward we get from years 3 through 10. One mistake up front outweighs everything else. So we have to be very careful about migrations. I talk very passionately, especially about the time value of work. I think migrations are really bread and butter in engineering, and I've just done a lot of reflecting on this even in my career, both at Netflix and Amazon. And if I have to be honest, I've noticed this mistake happen at least twice. Once both at Amazon and actually at Netflix, where I feel that had we taken an investor mindset to the migrations, we might have been able to make a better technical decision about the migrations and save ourselves a lot of time. The next point I want to make is about just how much our time is actually worth, and whether or not like a project is actually worth our time. So Warren Buffett actually had a quote once where it said that a business's success is more of a function of the boat that they're in than how effectively they row. So this actually applies to engineering as well, that the upfront decision about what to even work on sometimes is even more important than anything else that we do afterwards. Like, I mentor a lot of interns both at Amazon and Netflix, and a lot of them, if they're new grads and such, they always have imposter syndrome, and they're like, oh, I'm working too slow. And I always tell them that it's always better to work slowly on the right thing than to work quickly in the wrong one, on the wrong thing. So it's very important to make these kinds of like upfront decisions and make sure we're in the right boat, as Warren Buffett says, than to just dive straight into the code. And I see this particularly often with buy versus build decisions. So I'll admit, as an engineer, I love greenfield projects. No technical debt. I can do things the way I want. I understand every single line of code. And it could be that I also worked at Amazon for a couple of years, and maybe Jeff Bezos' frugality has just rubbed off on me too much. So I'm just a little bit too cheap sometimes. But what I've noticed, actually, even from the frugality at Amazon, is that by being frugal, it can actually sometimes cost you even more. So there are a lot of questions to the buy versus build, a lot of aspects to the buy versus build decision, and so there are a lot of questions that we have to ask here, and not just quickly default to the build. The first one is just on integration costs alone, because it could be cheap to buy something, but if integrating takes forever, then the integration cost could cost more than it took to even just build it from scratch. Core competencies of the company. Generally a company wants to focus their engineering efforts on what they're best at and try to outsource the rest. So for example, like even at Apex, the core competency is like fintech solutions. So the lower level platform engineering, such as like data storage or like compute power, that kind of stuff generally gets outsourced out. It's also important in buy versus build decisions to almost think like an investor and do these kinds of like basic cost calculations. And an easy way to do this is really just to take sort of how much you believe your engineering hours are worth. So for example, let's say it was worth $100 an hour, and you estimate the project to take, let's say 10 hours, then you can just do just as a very basic guideline. Just multiply hourly rate by the amount of time engineering hours you estimate that to take, and then you can get at least a basic guideline for the cost. Obviously, it doesn't account for things like the complexity and a lot of different other factors, but it's at least just a rough baseline. And actually, by doing this, you can already start to draw a graph. So to go over this graph, on the bottom here, we have the engineering. So we have basically the calculation we did earlier for the engineering cost of building a feature. And on the y-axis, we have the potential revenue that we might generate from building that feature. And so we can already start to draw almost like build and buy zones if we only look at it from a financial standpoint. That, for example, if you had a salary cost, if it only took 10K in engineering costs, but it generated revenue of 70K, then we can say that that's deep into the build zone, and then maybe build is a better decision. On the flip side, if you had, let's say it cost 70K, but it only generated 10K, then that would almost be like trading, you're trading 70K for 10K. It might make more sense to buy instead. And this is actually a very important decision to make because all of Apex's customers are actually making this decision. They're basically deciding that Apex, to build a fintech platform themselves would be so expensive that it would be better to just work with Apex and have Apex outsource the work to Apex than to build it themselves. So Apex is actually deep into the buy zone according to all of its clients. I actually came across this decision myself recently with a business that I bought with my business partner about a year ago called RecordJoy. RecordJoy is a screen recording website. It's almost kind of like Loom. And we actually had a decision on whether or not we wanted to buy this website or build it from scratch. Build it from scratch or buy it for 12K. So we actually did the same calculation that I went through earlier. We valued our engineering hours at $100 an hour. We said that it would take us about 2 months, or 320 hours of engineering time to build this from scratch. And so we just, as just a rough baseline, we said that okay, the cost of building this from scratch would be $32,000. So actually, my business partner and I actually ended up drawing a graph that comparing the buy versus build decision here. So just to go over this, the left side, on the red is the financial cost, which is the calculation we just did before. And obviously, there's always a time cost. So on the other side of the y-axis is the time cost. And we have to build the cost of the buy versus the build decisions. So for RecordJoy, we saw that we could buy it for 12K, but if we had to build it from scratch, the engineering time cost of that would be 32K. Buying would give us a product right now, whereas building it would give us would take 8 weeks to build. So we see both in terms of the financial cost and the time cost that buying was a better decision than building. And so we went ahead and bought RecordJoy. Looking back, buying RecordJoy was the single most important engineering decision that we made the entire year that we worked on RecordJoy. It allowed us to reduce engineering risk because we had a product that was guaranteed to work right now, as opposed to something that we didn't actually have any certainty that we would complete later. It also allowed us to focus better, because by buying RecordJoy, we had something that worked and we could just focus on monetizing the product rather than trying to like getting mired in the technical difficulties of even building it before we even tried to monetize it. As for RecordJoy, we worked on it for a few months. We got it from 0 to almost $1,000 in MRR. My business partner actually, he's at an MBA at UCLA, so then we had to sell the website and on microacquire.com, and apparently they actually send you some free swag if you successfully sell something on their website. The last point I want to discuss is on opportunity cost in engineering. So opportunity cost is what you give up when you make a choice. And the way I describe this often is sort of like, it's almost like choosing dessert. So like, let's say for dessert, we have a choice between ice cream, and we have the choice between eating a slice of cake. The cost of eating a slice of cake isn't just the price that we paid for the cake, but it is the foregone opportunity of not being able to enjoy the ice cream. We only have so much space in our stomach after all. So when one door opens, another door closes. You know, in engineering, we have a million things that we can do all the time. So when we do one cleanup, we work on one task, that means that we can't work on another task and we can't do another cleanup. So there's opportunity cost constantly in engineering. And it happens particularly with managing technical debt. I compare managing technical debt to sort of like it's sort of like cleaning a house. Just as how you will never get your technical debt fully down to zero, your house will also never be fully clean. But the goal of any technical debt elimination isn't necessarily to get it down to zero, but it's just to get it to a manageable state. Just as how any cleaning we do in a house is just to get the house into a livable state again. So even in the house, different rooms have different priorities. Like, why would we clean the garden, for example, the outside of the house, if the inside of the house isn't even clean yet? It doesn't make sense to clean the guest bedroom first if the main bedroom isn't quite clean yet. So there's always a priority to how we clean the house. There's priority to how we manage technical debt. And this is actually something that even Apex's customers do all the time. So for example, I know that Plaid is a big customer of Apex Fintech, and I'm certain that they probably have so much more testing around Apex, the integrations with Apex, than they do with, for example, like their internal tools that they build with Retool. If this goes out, if an internal tool goes out, you know, it's not customer impacting. But if their integration with Apex breaks, it's far worse. It's going to be a far worse impact. Even Apex has priorities to what they manage with testing and technical debt as well. Like the homepage for Apex, for example, just gets so much more traffic and generates so much more sales that it's far more important to make sure that we keep this up than one of the side pages like the About page instead. So there's actually a startup that actually had this problem recently for where they had the choice between opportunity cost and technical debt, and it was a startup called Doma. So Doma is a real estate software company. They automate the home buying, they automate the home buying process. And to prepare for their IPO in 2021, they actually had to clean up some technical debt with their cloud infrastructure. As when they were starting out, they were on Heroku for their all their deployments. Because Heroku is like a common choice for a lot of small startups. It's just a one-click deployment, it's very easy. But for security concerns and also just to scale the business, they had to migrate from Heroku over to Microsoft Azure. And so they gave themselves 4 months to plan and execute on this migration. But in the middle, they had a little snafu with the contract that they had with Heroku, where Heroku actually said that they would not allow Doma to renew their cloud contract at a lower volume. And so they only gave them the option of renewing at a longer-term contract. But this didn't make sense because they're already actively migrating off. But then Heroku essentially was threatening to pull the plug on their cloud infrastructure. So what did Doma do about this? And by the way, they also initially had 41 days to execute, and this cloud and contract issue actually cut it down, cut a full 30 days off of their schedule actually, from 41 days to 11. 11 days to migrate the whole cloud infrastructure is quite the feat. So what Joe did was they ended up calling all hands on deck on engineering, and they basically told everybody that you have to drop, essentially, if you're not working on this migration, you're not working on the right thing. So everybody basically had to drop what they were doing, and they had to prioritize migrating their team's apps off of Heroku onto Microsoft Azure first. This is basically an example of opportunity cost here, because if they didn't complete this this migration in time, it would cost them millions of dollars in a cloud contract, or they might suffer an outage when Heroku pulls the plug. So the opportunity cost of working on anything else other than on this migration was literally millions of dollars and was quite high. It was almost as if if they worked on anything else, it would be like cleaning the guest bedroom when the main bedroom for their Microsoft Azure migration, when the main bedroom was on fire. As for the migration, so they had 11 days to complete it. They actually managed to pull through and completed it in 8 days, with 3 extra days for testing. And they even had a whole delete party at the end, with a happy ending a few months after, don't actually successfully IPO. So I want to end this presentation with just some discussion questions on all 3 points on how we can bring this sort of investor mindset to engineering instead of just purely focusing on the technical aspects. So on the first point, on when I mentioned the time value of engineering work and on the cost of these long-term projects, the risks that we take on, I think that one thing that's worth asking is that we go through all the projects and take a critical look at the projects that will take the most time, especially if it takes over a year. It's okay to take large bets on engineering projects, but we just have to make sure that the expected rewards from those projects are proportional to the kind of risk that we have to take on. On the second point, on the value of our time, is there anything that we're working on, for example, at Apex, that is not worth as much, not quite worth our engineering time, and maybe some more effort should be put up front to just investigate whether there are other options to outsource instead. Especially this mistake, this could seem kind of basic just to investigate the tools, but then these kind of mistakes even happened at Netflix, for example. When I was working on the notifications team, we have over hundreds of emails that we send out to customers, and we were building an alerting system for them. And we almost actually built our own alerting system before we found out that in the platform engineering at Netflix, that they actually have a team dedicated to managing the page path for all the alerting throughout the company. So we were about to make a huge mistake building an alerting system from scratch, when instead we should have spent more time just seeing what other teams were even doing and integrating with the alerting team's solutions instead. So it's it's very important to try to do more upfront work and make sure we consider all the options before just diving right into it. And lastly, on opportunity cost, different tasks have different levels of priority. So we have to almost prioritize different, the services that our teams are managing based on their priorities. So for example, a billing service that a team manages is far more important than any other service, then maybe that means that when we dedicate engineering resources to technical debt reduction and to migration, to testing infrastructure and technical debt, then maybe we should prioritize the billing service over any other service because it's so critical. We always have to consider the opportunity cost of our work. I truly believe that in engineering, that if we focus more on adopting the investor mindset, that will get us further than chasing the latest tech fads. I think that if we focus more on considering, for example, the financial costs, the time costs, and the opportunity costs of our work, it will help us make better technical decisions and save time. Thank you.
Any questions for Michael? Got him here.
In your experience, who's sort of the best person placed to be my decision on the whole time effectiveness?
Sorry, say that again?
In your experience, who's best placed to be making the decision on what is the most, say, cost or time effective? Is it the product owner, or is it the developers themselves, just VAs, or?
Yeah, so I think it's both. So for example, for product initiatives, often they're the ones working with engineering leaders to work on how to best dedicate engineering resources. but that kind of decision also happens purely within an engineering team as well. Like if they have to clean up technical debt or like do any sort of like maintenance work, that's often a decision that's made purely within the engineering team that doesn't involve product. So then that's a discussion that is that can be made between just engineering.
Michael, do you have any suggestions on how you can really financially justify technical debt? Because I always find that, especially with us as a B2B, we're always chasing new functionality, the client wants us to do whatever, and leaves technical debt kind of in a second-class citizen, which I disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's hard for us to financially justify why we need to make that as important.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions for the group of how they can do that?
Yeah, so when it comes to technical debt especially, I feel like it's really important, like, there's some technical debt, like, technical debt has levels of priority too. There's some technical debt that will, like, literally make us move, let's say, 10 times faster, and some that will only incrementally move the needle. So for example, one low-hanging fruit that I see all engineering teams have, a lot of engineering orgs have, is the fact that if they have like duplicate services, like if 10 teams are building the same thing and we all centralize it into one, then you could almost argue that's like a 10x speed improvement because it's all only one team manages, not 10. They make one bug fixes in one place, not 10 places. So even for technical debt, I feel there are ways to prioritize to prioritize it, and then we should still go for the ones that will help us move a lot faster.
Michael, when you're thinking about team composition, do you try to have teams where everyone is thinking this way, or do you ever try and carve out a space for somebody who sort of doesn't like put $1 sign on everything and then focuses more on coming up with creative technical solutions?
Yeah, so I think that definitely like the product owners and the managers, I think that like sometimes TPMs, I think that some people will be thinking about it more than others, but I still think it's very helpful for even individual contributing engineers to be thinking about this as well, because they are still stakeholders at the table, especially if they have to discuss the value of like these kinds of engineering cleanups with the manager. They can often help bring up these kinds of points and help the manager think about this. So like, for example, I said that I was in these kinds of migrations before at Netflix and Amazon, and maybe one of my biggest regrets is maybe I should have spoken up and brought up these kind of points myself and not just think that it's on someone else to do this kind of work, that maybe it's my responsibility to bring it up as well, even as an individual contributing engineer.
So I bring it up, I've been on teams where I am playing more of this role. Then I've had coworkers on that team who are sort of like not thinking that way. But then they will come up with they'll come up with something like putting us on Ansible, just like years ago, when Ansible was cool. It's like, I never would have penciled out that made sense. I would always be like, no, it needs to be done Friday. Because they weren't thinking that way, they were like, oh, let's play around and put us on Ansible. Who knows how long it takes? But in the end, I was like really glad they did, because it let us do what we used to not be able to do. So I struggled with harmonizing these two ideas.
Maybe the way to have this kind of constructive conversation is just if they propose the Ansible, just maybe if they can document just what is the process right now for these kinds of for the build system and how long that takes, and then if they can show like if we move to Ants, how much faster it would help all of us move, and if they show that it also only takes like a couple days, just like a week or two to help with that, and it helps everybody on the team, but essentially that's almost like an investment kind of investor standpoint as well. So I think that if they can just document just the real impact of that kind of move from whatever deployment build system they had before to Ants, then I think that could still frame it in a sort of like an investor mindset as well.
Is this something you've done? I just asked because when I think about this person who I was interacting with, so this is a different company than what you were talking about. I was talking about that sort of stuff, and he was just like, oh, that's so boring. Or like, he wouldn't say that, but he just wouldn't. He would not entertain this sort of mindset, because it was sort of like anathema to his sort of playful, creative energy. So I guess I asked, have you been able to get this type of person to work with people like that?
I think there's definitely a balance, because a lot of engineers are, like myself included, are attracted to like elegant solutions and the technical side of things. So I think there's definitely a delicate balance to make here. I still think that I still feel like it's possible to have a constructive conversation if you frame it the right way.
Okay.
Yes.
So realistically, there's probably going to be some conflict between the projects, they increase, our efficiency or something like that. How do you navigate those? Is just whatever the client wants comes first, or?
So there's always this battle between innovation and the technical debt. But the problem with debt is that you're paying interest on it, right? So the more, I think the way I would describe this is that we're paying interest on this, and over time the interest might exceed the principal. So at that point, then if we want to innovate at the speed that we want, we have to prioritize some of the technical debt. And the way we worked on this at Amazon actually was that we had, for example, the team that I was on, I was in the Kindle department. The way we did it was we had 3-week sprints. We said every engineer had basically two task points a day, and just off the bat we actually cut it in half, so that every engineer only had to work on basically just get one thing done a day, and then we would consider that like moving a needle. And what product would do was they would actually just take 20% off of the available engineering resources just right off the bat, and then say, okay, that is dedicated purely just to engineering, so to this kind of tech debt removal, and it's up to engineering to do it in the way that would be most efficient. So I think that it doesn't have to come at a cost. Like over time, the technical debt could actually slow down innovation. And so if maybe at the beginning, if you just take 20% off the engineering resources just to remove the highest priority ones, considering opportunity cost, that's solution worked well when I was at Amazon, and maybe that's something Apex can consider as well.
So it's more a global thing that everybody has to buy into rather than just the engineers buying it.
In terms of like allocating time for the technical debt, well, the PMs were part of the Scrum, part of the sprint planning as well. So it was an open discussion between both, but it was like off the top, they didn't even really argue with engineering about the 20% there. So.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Well, so that gives us something to think about when we're thinking about our projects this week. If you think about how the project that you're working on is going to go to market, maybe you want to do